meeting to order. And we do have a quorum. I'm going to call the roll.
Clack,
Here.
Foster,
Here.
Considine,
Here.
Rogers.
Here.
All right, we do have a quorum. And we need to discuss approving the minutes of the February 10th special meeting.
I make a motion to accept the minutes.
Do I hear any discussion? Do I hear a second?
Second.
Do I hear any discussion on the motion? All right, all those in favor of approving the minutes?
Aye.
Say aye. Aye. Any opposed? None heard. Motion carries. Item 2.
3.
3. All right, the public hearing to discuss the get the proper it's a continuance of the public hearing of September 23rd, 2021, with the applicant of Tom Birchfield. And it
Yes, sir.
it pertains to the
He's just reading the motion.
Okay.
Location of the storage building on his property on lot number 3, block number 2 of the W.L. Smith edition. And,
Make a motion to enter public hearing.
yes, do I hear a motion in a
I'll
public
move,
hearing?
I'll move that we enter the public hearing.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None heard. The motion carries. We're now in so we need to discuss the action on the variances for the side setback and the rear setback.
Before we move into the actions, we'll either, since there's no one here from the public to speak, then we need to adjourn from public hearing and then move to the next item. So you've got several people to talk once
I think you'll be.
you move out of the public hearing.
I think you want him in the action one, right?
Yeah, I think Kenny wants to talk about procedures and policies, and I think that ought to be under the next item, not under this one. This opportunity for the public to speak.
Motion to exit the public hearing?
Mhm.
Seconded.
All right, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None heard. We have exited the public hearing. Okay, now we're prepared to discuss the possible action. Kenny, did you have?
Good evening, everybody. Just want to give you a little bit of background of how we do permitting and everything. I don't know if you all are aware of what we do and how we do it, but a little bit of information there on Mr. Birchfield's residence there at 105 North Mays. The gas line does run on the west side of the alley along with the electric that's overhead. So those utilities are on the west side, which would be close to his backyard on the alley and stuff. When we get a request for a building to be built or something, we tell the customer what we need, and they bring it in. Cheryl and I go to the conference room to review it. with our code books and IRC, IBC, whatever we need to follow. The one thing that we need is a complete application, which gives us the address, and then we can look up the zone for that, and then what the customer wants to build there to see if it's even is approved to even be built in that zone. And then once we get that, then of course we ask for a set of plans for the building, and then we look at the code book to see if it's meeting the height, the setback requirements, any max lot coverage, and also safety. And then we look at the plot survey to see if there's anything on there that's listing like utility easements or some other easements. We had an easement the other day that it wasn't a utility easement, but it was something else that showed up. And it showed up on the plot survey, wasn't a bank survey. So that's why we always want the plot survey. When this got started, Mr. Birchfield's mother and I believe stepbrother came in to get some information about trying to get a permit and stuff, and we would not issue the permit because we didn't have the information to go off to, be able to sit down and review it and stuff. We told them what we needed. In the end of April, I received a phone call. A couple was very upset that there was a building built and that was not meeting setbacks. They had tried to get them a 2-car garage built and were not meeting setbacks. And they were calling, wanting to know why we had permitted that building versus we wouldn't let them build. And I told them that that building was not permitted and that we would look into it. And then in June, Mr. Birchfield came up. He was upset with the setback requirements and also getting a plot survey done. We did inform him of the BOA. In July, Trent went to issue a citation for the building being built without a permit. And then in August, Mr. Birchfield and his attorney came up to start the BOA process. So that's how we got all started with you all here. Now, once we got a copy of the plot survey, that's when we saw that there was a utility easement listed on the south side of his property, which the building is setting on because it goes from May Street all the way to the alley. And we definitely knew that Jared Crisp and also Gary Pruitt had also told me no building on utility easement. That's another reason why we want the plot survey to see that. So based on the information of not the proper setbacks, also building on a utility easement, myself as the building inspector that inspects and approves for permitting, we could not issue a permit because of the lot setback side and rear, and then we found out the utility easement was there. And then also some utility lines that are gas line that runs real close to his fence. I don't know exactly where that is. Jared just said he knew that it was just right there by his fence. So that's why we have to say that we could not issue the permit, and that's why it was brought to you all. So if you all have any questions for me, I'll be glad to answer them for you.
I've got one question for you, Kenny. So the utility easement, that's for an existing line?
The utility easement is for a sewer, if I'm right, Steve?
There is, yes.
It's listed in your all's packet. It shows it on the south side of his property.
Yeah.
The utility easement goes all the way from Mays to the alley.
So had the slab been poured after the utility?
The
easement?
slab had been poured years and years and years ago. There used to be a building there, and I believe Mr. Birchfield tore it down. I guess it was in bad shape. He tore it down years ago, and he had left the slab there.
Yeah. So had the slab been built after the utility easement or the utility easement?
I don't know. I mean, that's how long it's been there.
Yeah.
With it. It's just showing that there is a utility easement. Now, the whole utility easement, according to Steve, is not being used, only part of it, but it's on the plot survey as a utility easement, and that's what we have to look at. that it's on the plot, so therefore nothing can be built on that utility easement.
Now, on utility easements, you can't have a slab foundation, but can you have a portable building on top of utility easement?
If it's movable, you can have a building on the utility easement if it's movable,
Okay, that's what.
without a variance.
Yeah. And then now, my other question. Okay. So, Mr. Birchfield got the plat, correct? Or did
I'm
we-
sorry?
Did Mr. Birchfield order the plat?
Yes, he
or did we
provided us
get-
this.
Yes, he did provide us the plot survey and stuff on there.
I'd probably ask him this question, but I'm gonna ask you, is that, the way I'm reading this, is this true that the fence line is past his property line anyway?
Yes, the way I take it, Steve, is it is on another individual's
So it's
property.
almost 3 feet past the property line is the
Correct.
fence line? Okay. So the original slab was the same way? The original slab would have been encroaching on someone else's?
Yes, that's why I take it that it is. And it's on the other person's property and Mr. Birchfield's.
Okay.
We'll talk about the other person's property here in a second, but it's no longer an alley. There's an easement for the gas lines or the electric lines, but the alley in that location is no longer an alley.
So on the east side, that is actually personal property now?
That's
In
his
addition to the
neighbor's
south-
property to the east of him, yeah.
In addition to the south side?
That's correct.
But his fence that's on the south side, I believe, is where the utility easement goes from there 10 foot to the north.
Yeah.
Is what I
That's what it's
believe is
showing.
true on there.
So the property owner to his east actually owns what is shown as the alley
Yes.
That's
Up.
correct.
up to Mr. Birchfield's east property line. And so,
He will sign a encroachment agreement. It's in the works right now.
Was it unsigned when we saw it?
What was that, Mr. Birchfield? I'm
He
sorry.
said he would sign an encroachment agreement. They actually have one in the works now.
For the fence and the building?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I don't want to.
There was like 3 feet there that apparently is encroaching on his property. And I contacted him. We've got the letter at the attorney, or the agreement at the attorney's, and they did the adjustments to it that he wanted. And all we got to do is get him to sign it and then give it to you guys. And there's no problem. He will sign it.
We've seen a copy of it. It was unsigned at the time. He has told us it will get signed.
And apparently that has not been accomplished at this point in time. So, I mean, I'm not saying it's not going to happen. I'm just saying this board needs to take into the fact that at this point in time, you're asked to make a judgment on it, but that hasn't happened. So if that needs to be taken into account when you can make consideration.
But like I say, as far as us with the city, as far as issuing a permit, we could not issue it because of the setbacks requirements were not being met, and then we found out later that there was a utility easement where this building's sitting. So I just wanted you all to understand kind of the process that we go through. And again, if you all have any other questions, I'll be glad to answer them, or if you're through, I'll go sit back down.
I guess that's all.
Okay?
Thank
I
you.
might mention, Mr. Chairman, that when this came before the board in December, actually it came before, I guess, the board in September, I made the recommendation to Mr. Birchfield that he need to go get a survey to make sure it's exactly what the situation was. And so in November, according to his plat of survey, November the 15th, he had a survey done by Green Country Surveying, which set out the fact that the building, the slab, was over the utility easement, it was over his property line on the back, and it was done without a permit. When we looked at that in December, it came before the Board of Adjustment, and I believe I correctly told this board that even though the utility easement is within your purview to grant a waiver of, that, and the setback from the rear setback is in the purview of this board to grant a variance to. The fact that he encroached on someone else's property, not the city's property, but someone else's property, was outside your purview. And that he needed to resolve that issue before we moved forward with anything else. That kind of brings us to today. In my opinion, he had 3 things he needed to resolve. The biggest one was the resolution between him and another private owner. We have no right to grant an encroachment on someone else's property, clearly. And so that was a civil issue between him and his neighbor, which at this point, we've seen a draft, I guess I'll call it, of the agreement, the encroachment agreement, which would run with the land, but we don't have a signed copy. So my recommendation again is if this board chooses to grant him a variance, it would be contingent upon that agreement being signed between him and another private property owner. Because again, if that's not resolved, that's still outside your purview. Okay, so the other issues, the utility easement encroachment, right as indicated by Kenny, clearly inside the utility easement, there's a sanitary sewer stub, if you want to call it that, that extends from the street in front of this house, which is Mays Street. There's a manhole at the street, and then there's a short stub that extends up this utility easement to a clean out that is not viewable. I mean, it's not, we don't know exactly where it's at. However, we had the utility board, the sewer guys come and rod it, and they put a rod up that, or a snake up that line, determine, yes, that line is there, and it was approximately this distance, but it was to a certain distance that did not actually go under this building. Even though the building and the slab encroach in the utility easement, there is physically not a utility under that slab or under that building. As Kenny indicated, there's a gas line that runs north and south alongside the fence. The fence, as you can see, encroaches on the right-of-way, but if it's alongside the fence, then it's not under the building. It's near the building, but it's not actually under the building. So in response to trying to solve that issue, I asked for a ruling from MUB regarding the encroachment on the 10-foot utility easement. And on April 27th, Mr. Chris wrote that, and I'll just read it to you, and you can have a copy of it, obviously. I do not have any issue with the encroachment. The only thing is we will not abandon this easement. And if we have to get in there to repair our infrastructure and we damage their building, it would be repaired at their expense, not MUB's. Well, there was not really a request to abandon the easement. It was just to allow an encroachment. I think that should be pointed out to the landowner that if you encroach on a utility easement, no matter where it's at, front, back, side, or otherwise, wherever we have a utility easement, if you put a fence up over the utility easement, if we have to get in there, we can take the fence down. Now, from a PR standpoint, we might put the fence back up. And if the building's in the way or for some reason in the future, and it sits on a concrete slab, if we have to get in there to extend that sewer for any reason or work on that sewer for any reason, whatever the case may be, and that building is in the way, it'll be moved because it's in our utility easement. And he understands that. I forgot the day he came in. It was April. It was around last week, I think. He came in and we went over these items. I wanted to make perfectly clear to him that just satisfying the encroachment with his neighbor was not his only issue, that he had the other issues to deal with that are within the purview of this board to grant a variance to. But I just wanted to point that out. So. Mr. Birchfield, was there anything you wanted to say to this board?
Sir, I didn't quite hear you.
Is there anything you wanted to say to the board?
I've tried my best, sir. And that's about it, all I can say.
I do have a question for you, Mr. Birchfield. Let me know if you can't hear me.
Sure.
Your encroachment agreement you're signing with your neighbor, that is going to be for, I don't know the correct term. It's not just their ownership of the property. That'll be linked to the property itself, correct?
Right, yes, sir.
Okay.
It runs with the property, not to the landowner now, and so that'd be part of their abstract and their deed, that encroachment would continue as long as that, property or that building or that encroachment exists.
Okay.
If he ever removes it for some reason, he can't go put it back under that same encroachment agreement.
Okay, if he ever removes the building.
Yes, I'm
Right.
sorry, or the fence for that matter. If
Okay.
he takes the fence down, then he'd have to put the fence back up on his property.
Okay.
He can't, that encroachment doesn't entitle him to use that as he sees fit, I guess would be the way I'd put it.
Gotcha.
Okay.
So with all that information in front of you, what's before this board is items 4.1 and 4.2, to decide what, if any, action you want to do.
I'll tell you guys what I'm thinking. My thought process is what makes this different than a portable building is the slab.
Yep.
The slab exists before this and it will exist after it. So to me, that I'm not too sure I see a difference between this and a portable building in the fact that he just happened to be putting the portable building on top of where a slab already existed.
Yeah,
So my big hangup's were the encroachment issue, but if that can be handled with a
Agreement.
agreement with his neighbor, and the other thing is like with the utility easement, once again, the slab was already there, so either way, it would have had to been destroyed to be able to get to the utility, if they're gonna put a utility line in. Those are my, how I'm
Right.
coming up with something.
looking at these photographs of the inside of the building, and details, it looks like the building is built beyond where the slab is, that it's,
Mr. Chairman, I believe that's correct. The building that he's got up there, the
Is larger.
south half of the building, or the south 2/3 of the building, or the south 4/5 of the building sits on the concrete slab, and the north face of that is sitting on poles that have been extended down into the ground.
Okay, so the south side,
The south side there is, actually, I believe that, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Birchfield, so I'm speaking out, but at one time, I guess the existing building that was there that they tore down went out to the edge of the slab. And so.
Right, yes.
The building that he's put back up that's there now was literally moved to the north to stay inside his existing fence, or did he move the fence as well? No, he just moved it back inside the fence. But that sort of offset it from the slab that was there. So part of it sits on a slab and part of it doesn't.
Yeah, well, it's sitting on an ankle on that slab. Now, the very back corner is kind of up close to the fence, but the front of the building, there's a few feet between the building and the fence, and the slab is going out past that.
Yeah.
That's what makes the building part of the rear encroachment on the other private property.
Yeah.
I might also give you some other information, just so you have all of it in front of you. This is covered under the UDO, under Section 10, subsection 8(1)(f), that talk about detached accessory buildings. It basically talks about the fact that the buildings have to comply with the same building codes as the rest of the building on the house. And the reason I believe that this comes into play is because the existing building that was sitting on the slab is no longer there. So the fact that there's let's call it a new building on this slab, that's a substantial remodel of that existing building. Had the old building been left in place and remodeled as it was, in my opinion, it would probably be grandfathered as is, but it's a substantial remodel. So as a result, he must comply with the UDO during that remodel, because he took it down to the slab and then brought it back up, whether it was brought in one piece or piece at a time. It was still a substantial remodel. So that's covered under the UDO, and that's where it sets out that you cannot be, you have to be more than 3 feet away from the property line on the side setback as well as the rear setback. However, as you know, there's always a however. There is a provision in that section that says that, and I'll read it to you. It says that compliance with the lot and building regulations. It says, see provisions governing allowed yard obstructions, subsection 10-19-7C of this title. So even though the accessory buildings are covered under 8-1, the exceptions to that rule are covered under 19-7C. And in that section, there's a pretty substantial table that identifies all of the things that have an exception to the rules, if you will, or exceptions are allowed to the rules. And it regards street setback, side setbacks, and rear setbacks. This is what it talks about. And in my opinion, I'll just read the first one. Accessory buildings, see also subsection 10-8 for definition. It talks about that you cannot obstruct, or you cannot not adhere to the setback rule for streets or side setbacks, but you can obstruct the rear setback if it's defined. So technically, he actually has a rear setback obstruction because he's beyond his property line, but he's covering that with an agreement. We'll assume at this point that that's a deal that will work itself out. So again, what's in front of this board is the fact that he is encroaching on a utility easement, and he's closer than 3 foot to the side setback, which according to this variance, or according to this table, that is the side setback is not eligible for variance without this board's action. Does that make sense? If we could do it administratively, if he was 3 feet 1 inch from the property, but the fact is that it's less than 3 feet. Forgetting there's a utility easement, it's less than 3 feet, so that it would take this variance by this board to allow that. I don't want to make the world muddy, but the fact is nothing's really as black and white as it seems. But and this is these are the things you all need to consider. These are not really administratively for us as staff to deal with. Now I'm done.
So the building is closer than the required 3-foot setback from the south
It is.
line. It's in the it's over part of it is over the utility easement.
And I believe,
On
Chairman,
the
that that's
south
two separate items, but yes.
That's two
in both
separate
cases.
items. And then the third item is that it is in the rear setback.
Correct. And that's a civil action that between him and his neighbor.
Well,
So.
it's within the rear setback, but it also encroaches beyond the rear setback onto the neighbor's property.
Right.
But the rear setback should be able to be handled under that exception that's detailed out for accessory
Right.
buildings.
Yeah.
The rear setback.
Without a variance, without a
20%
variance.
of the lot, the depth of the lot. So basically, if you have a 100-foot deep lot, 20% of that would be 20 feet. That you could not set the building in, or whatever the people wanted to do.
Now, this is showing a 15-foot setback line.
By plat, there
By
is no
plat.
rear setback line because there was an alley at the time that the plat was filed. So the alley served, unlike a utility easement that we all probably have on the back of our property, this alley set out areas that was the city's for them, and it was deeded to the city for them to operate. So there's not a rear setback by plat that 15 feet. So I've questioned the surveyor as to where he got that 15 feet. That's usually kind of a default thing in other communities and maybe even in Pryor and locations, but it's not by plat. So the livability or the rear setback 20% rule, we've
Well-
talked about that several times
Yeah.
at this board. That does apply, or it does apply to all properties in Pryor. Auxiliary building, the same table that I just described has exceptions to that livability rule. So as a rear setback area. So, I think it's reasonable to consider that. I don't think the 15-foot utility easement as defined by his surveyor is correct. It's just not there. Frankly, that 3-foot number is really there for that purpose, is to keep you from building up next to the property line and under a overhead power line, or right up next to a gas line, or right up next to something that's within the alley, but is beyond your property. So the intent of it is to keep somebody from building something that would interfere with the MUB's ability to work on overhead power or underground utilities.
Also, I don't know if the board is aware, but the old existing building had been torn down years ago.
Excuse me.
And then I believe he was given this building, or maybe, I don't know. Anyway, he wound up with this building and just erected it in April of this year.
Last year?
No, but
Last year.
Oh, last year, 21, I'm sorry, April of 21.
Well, it looks like to me that with the overhead lines there, there's room to work on them. Probably not as much as they'd like, but there's probably room to work on them. If you get the encroachment agreement, that takes care of the too far back in my mind. It's not interfering with the gas line. The sewer line doesn't go that far back from the street. They're not.
Now, if MUB agrees that the building encroachment on the utility easement is not a problem for them at this point in time, and that it is understood that if they do have to use that part of the utility easement, that it's the owner's responsibility to repair or replace the building themselves, and would not be MUB's responsibility.
Right.
And it looks like the main thing that we have to decide is if encroaching upon the 3-foot setback, side setback requirement is something that we can give a variance on.
And the other thing is that we may have some things come back based on how you all rule on this. Other people may be willing to seek exceptions.
Understood.
Because like I say, what we have to go by is the code, and that's what we
Right.
have to do on there. And we're thankful that you all are here for this situation to help us out, so. But
And what is our working definition of portable for a building? Just not anchored?
Well,
You asked me a very
movable.
specific question, which I don't have the answer to, so let me look it up, unless somebody has that already.
what we've considered as far as portable has been one that's on skids that you could hook up a truck to and pull it real easy out have allowed people to set within that 20%, usually like 10 foot or so in the past, on ones that are on skids where they could hook up their truck and move it real quick if mud or somebody needs to be in there, utilities or whatever on it. But they've never been back all the way to the very back of the lot. They have operating room.
But technically they can though, can't they? Can, a portable building can go all the way to the rear property line.
No, what we have been doing, no, we have stopped them, they can't be any closer than 10 foot.
But where does that come from though? Because like I was under the understanding that portable could be within the rear setback as far to the property.
It is within that 20%, but it can't be what we have done in the last, since I've been here for 5 years, have said that it can't fall any closer than 10 foot of that rear property line.
Yeah.
Because 10 foot would give them almost pretty good access to be able to do whatever they need to do, or if it's cable, keep people, or, you know, telephone people or something like that.
Yeah.
Try to have them some work room. But in case they did have to move the building, it could be a strap put on it, and it could be pulled out of the way to give them that full 20% if they needed that.
And I can't speak to the 10-foot rule that's been used, but in the UDO, it defines, under section 2, it says detached accessory buildings in the rear setbacks must be set back at least 3 feet from the interior lot lines. So 10 foot may be a rule that has been used, but I don't know that we have anything that sets that out in writing.
But that 3 foot's the interior, the sidelines and stuff on that.
I do not see a definition of the word portable.
Okay, I just. I mean, it seems to me that at some point, probably this building will have to be moved. At some point. But whether it's now or whenever they need to work on the utilities, you know, that would be the timeframe. So I'm leaning toward, I'm not too sure, like I wouldn't favor the variances, no, as long as the property owner is aware that, you know, if they ever have to get to that utility easement, he will have to, at that point, move the building.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's in his best
Yeah.
interest to make sure it is as movable as possible. Like,
Yeah, I don't know how movable it is.
because it's got those piers.
Well, it could,
Well, they moved it in though, didn't they? Wasn't that the story, that they bought it as a,
I don't know.
some reason, I thought, like, they bought it, or the whole building was given to them?
I was
Church.
under the impression the church.
The church
gave it to them.
Did they, so was it just brought in and set down, or was it,
I think you had to rebuild it.
no?
Yeah, none of the inside pictures shows the south side of the building.
Well, I think this one picture,
I'd say at this point, we cannot consider this building movable in the state that it's in. It'd have to be torn down, moved, and reconstructed. And
The definition we're working under is auxiliary buildings,
right,
not portable buildings.
right,
I understand
mm-hmm.
we're splitting hairs here, but,
right.
you know, unless we find a definition that says portable buildings are auxiliary buildings or vice versa, we're talking about, there's nothing in the word auxiliary that says it has to be movable.
Right.
Right.
I mean, it can't be sitting on a concrete foundation or anchored in that manner. I'm not an attorney. I just,
Sure.
I don't want to go down that road of portable versus non-portable.
The exception you read was for auxiliary.
Auxiliary
Okay.
buildings, yes, sir.
Sorry, I probably was sending us down a rabbit hole then.
So I think, I mean, in my judgment, we're stretching it on all counts. I mean, it's unfortunate that we got this far and there's a building already in existence that is in a spot it probably should not be. But that's what we've got, and so we need to decide, are we gonna allow this to remain like that? And then, again, open the doors for people that have already been denied because they couldn't meet the setback requirements, come back and say, well, you did it for him.
That's the worrying part.
You're opening the barn door. And so, as far as the technicalities go, it looks like we have a foundation that we could work from, but when you get right down to it, is that the foundation we want to build? That's my hindrance right at the moment.
Mr. Birchfield, when you were, came to this, a year ago, I guess, we talked
Yes,
about,
sir.
we talked about the, whether or not you thought you could move the building. And that, you said that was an option at the time. Is that still, do you think that's an option?
Well, it's really, I mean, it's really not. It wasn't at the time, actually. I mean, basically you had to tear it down and start over. I mean, I sent pictures where the poles are concreted into the ground.
Yeah.
And then the others are actually just bolted to the concrete.
Yeah, the bolted to the concrete is probably something you could work with, but the poles in the ground, you cannot, in my opinion.
Right.
There's actually been bigger buildings moved completely, a lot bigger than this building before, so it can be done if it wants to be done.
Yeah, you could solve the,
Yeah, I was gonna say, you can saw the piers off and jack it up.
Right now, it's, set with those posts.
the posts that are set in the ground could be cut
Mhm.
at the ground
You can
and,
cut them and then jack up the joists and then put some skids underneath the joists and then just slide the whole thing.
They'll move red iron buildings and stuff
Mhm.
completely, so. I just don't want it to get started where people say, well, gosh, I'm not even gonna go get a permit, I'm just gonna go build it and then get caught.
Yeah. That's
I mean, that's the purpose of.
part of my concern as well.
Codes and everything follow, and, majority of the people follow them, they accept, some people are, yes, they've been upset that they hadn't got to do what they wanted to do, but they understood, because that was code, and they were citizens of the city. But he was given some information as far as setbacks and stuff, and then the building was built.
do I hear a motion of any kind on the resolution of this?
I do have one more question for Steve. If we do not approve this, is he fined or has to take the building down? What's the,
He, as I understand, he has been ticketed for constructing this building without a permit, and that's still pending. That has not been acted on by the attorney, so there is a fine involved with that. If this board chooses not to allow the variance, then he will be notified that he has a non-complying building and given so many days to move it. Either move it or remove the obstruction. And he has recourse to take it to the council. Actually, the Board of Adjustment has, there are no appealing to the city council from this board. He can take it to the civil case or lawsuit if he wants to.
I'll make a motion that we deny the variance.
All right, a motion has been made to deny the variance. Do I hear a second?
I'll second it.
All right, the motion has been made and seconded.
Do I need to clarify this is for item 1, the side setback?
I think you can take both of those
Yeah.
at the same time.
In my mind, I was doing both, 1 and 2.
Okay.
I should have said that, but.
Okay.
All right, the motion has been made and seconded for item 4, number 1 and number 2, to deny the variance. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Nay.
We have 3 ayes and 1 nay. So the motion has carried.
Does anyone want to address that to Mr. Birchfield to make sure he understood?
Mr. Birchfield, did you understand the board action?
I didn't quite hear which way it went there.
Okay, there was a motion made to deny the variance
Yes, sir.
request, and that motion passed 3-1, so the variance has been denied.
Okay. Very well then. There's nothing else I can do?
I'm not sure what my role here is. There are no appeals through the city of Pryor for action by the Board of Adjustment.
Yes, sir.
You have other avenues that you should get legal counsel to advise you on if you want to pursue that. You most likely will receive a letter from the city indicating that you, again, have a building that's in non-compliance with setbacks and be given a certain amount of time to either remove that obstruction or take other action. And that's what your legal counsel would need to advise you on. That is close as I can
Okay.
get.
Well, I'll just have to take it down. It is just a shed, and the concrete's been there for 20-plus years.
I think we should just let him know that action's been handled and he needs to contact later.
Mr. Birchfield, we're going to be hanging the phone up now. The action
Okay.
has been denied, and you will need to seek your attorney's advice, and this meeting is concluded. Thank you.
Okay.
I'll make a motion, we adjourn.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor of adjourning? Say
Aye.
aye. Motion carried. We are adjourned.